They mocked her when she said her grandmother was a SEAL legend, then froze as the team arrived in the conference room at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado was packed with officers, analysts, and senior enlisted personnel. Lieutenant Junior Grade Maya Torres stood near the back, her Navy dress blues crisp and perfect, her dark hair pulled into a regulation bun. She was one of 3 women in the room, and the only one under 30. The briefing was about the upcoming commemoration of Operation Gothic Serpent, the 1993 Battle of Mogadishu. A panel of retired SEALs and Delta Force operators would be speaking about lessons learned, modern applications, and the evolution of special operations. "My grandfather was there," said Lieutenant Commander Brad Hutchins, a SEAL officer standing near the front. His voice carried that effortless confidence of someone who'd never been questioned. "He was with SEAL Team 6, pulled 3 Rangers out of a downed Black Hawk, got the Silver Star." Murmurs of respect rippled through the room. Several officers nodded knowingly. Maya shifted her weight, debating whether to speak. She'd learned early in her career that some stories were better left untold. Being a woman in Naval Special Warfare support was already hard enough without drawing additional attention. But something about Hutchins's tone, that casual entitlement, that assumption that he alone carried legacy, made her speak up. "My grandmother was there too," Maya said, quietly. The room didn't exactly go silent, but there was a noticeable lull. Heads turned. Hutchins looked back at her with barely concealed amusement. "Your grandmother?" he repeated, his eyebrows raised. "What, was she a nurse at the field hospital?" Scattered chuckles erupted around the room. Maya felt the familiar heat creeping up her neck, but she kept her voice steady. "No, sir. She was a combat medic attached to the Ranger unit. She treated wounded operators under fire for 14 hours straight." Hutchins exchanged glances with a fellow SEAL officer beside him. The smirk on his face was unmistakable. "A combat medic in Mogadishu. Ma'am, with all due respect, there were no female medics on the ground during Gothic Serpent. That's well documented." "Actually," Maya started, but Hutchins cut her off. "Look, I'm sure your grandmother served honorably somewhere, but let's not rewrite history here. The Battle of Mogadishu was an all-male operation. Rangers, Delta, SEALs, the 10th Mountain Guys, all men. Maybe she was stationed in theater, but she wasn't in the city." More nods around the room. Maya felt the walls closing in. This was exactly why she rarely mentioned her grandmother's service. People didn't believe it. They couldn't reconcile the official narrative with the quiet truth. "Sir, I'm not rewriting anything," Maya said, her voice firmer now. "Her name was Elena Reyes. She was attached to—" "Elena Reyes?" Another officer, a stocky commander with a chest full of ribbons, laughed outright. "Torres, come on. You're telling us your grandmother was some sort of secret operator? What's next? She was a SEAL, too." The room erupted in laughter. Even some of the junior officers who'd been neutral were now grinning. Maya stood there, her face burning, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. Hutchins held up a hand, playing the magnanimous leader. All right, let's not embarrass the lieutenant. I'm sure she misunderstood some family stories. It happens. My uncle used to tell me he flew F-14s until I found out he was a crew chief." More laughter. "But, hey Torres, if your grandmother really was in Mogadishu, maybe she can join our panel next week." His tone was dripping with condescension. Maya said nothing. There was nothing to say. She'd learned long ago that some battles couldn't be won with words. The briefing continued. Maya stood in the back, invisible again, her hands clasped behind her back. But inside, a storm was building. Not anger. Anger was useless. It was something colder. Determination. After the briefing ended, officers filed out in clusters, talking and laughing. Hutchins walked past her with his entourage. Not even I. Glancing in her direction. She was beneath notice now. Maya pulled out her phone and opened her contacts. She scrolled to a name she hadn't called in months. Abuela Elena. Her grandmother was 73 now, living in a quiet neighborhood in San Diego. She'd stopped talking about her military service decades ago. Too many people didn't believe her. Too many doors had been shut in her face. She'd learned, like Maya, that some truths were too uncomfortable for people to accept. Maya hesitated, her thumb hovering over the call button. Her grandmother had been through enough. She didn't need to be dragged back into a world that had erased her. But then Maya remembered Hutchins's smirk, the laughter, the casual dismissal. She pressed call. The phone rang 3 times before a warm, slightly raspy voice answered. "Mija, is everything okay?" "Abuela," Maya said quietly. "I need to ask you something." Elena Reyes sat in her small living room, the afternoon light filtering through lace curtains. Photos covered the walls, her children, her grandchildren, her late husband in his marine dress blues. But there was one photo she kept in a drawer, wrapped in tissue paper. A photo she hadn't looked at in years. "What is it, Mija?" Elena asked, concern threading through her voice. Maya took a breath. "The commemoration ceremony next week. For Mogadishu. There's going to be a panel of veterans, SEALs, Rangers, Delta guys, and I mentioned you were there, that you were a medic." Silence on the other end. Maya could hear her grandmother's breathing, slow and measured. "And they didn't believe you," Elena said finally. It wasn't a question. "They laughed at me, Abuela. They said there were no women on the ground, that I was making it up or confused." Another pause. When Elena spoke again, her voice was harder, edged with something Maya had rarely heard. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to come to the ceremony. I want you to tell your story. The real one. The one you never talk about." "Maya." "Please, Abuela. I'm tired of being invisible. I'm tired of them thinking we don't belong. You earned your place there, you bled for it, and they act like you don't exist." Elena was quiet for a long moment. Maya could picture her sitting in her worn armchair, her weathered hands gripping the phone, her dark eyes staring at something far away. "If I do this," Elena said slowly, "it won't be quiet. People will ask questions. There will be pushback. You know how the Navy is about things that don't fit the official story." "I know. And you're willing to deal with that? The scrutiny, the doubt?" Maya thought about Hutchins's smirk, about every condescending comment she'd endured in her 3 years of service, about every time someone assumed she was a secretary or a yeoman instead of an intelligence officer. "Yes," she said firmly. "I am." Elena exhaled slowly. "Then I'll come. But I'm not coming alone." "What do you mean?" "There were others, Mija. Others who were there. Others who remember. If I'm going to do this, I'm doing it right. Give me a few days." 3 days later, Maya received an email from her grandmother. Attached was a scanned document, a decades-old after-action report, partially redacted, with a handwritten note at the bottom. Maya zoomed in and read the faded ink. "Doc Reyes, 3 Rangers and 1 Delta operator alive because of you. We don't forget. Sua Sponte. Captain J. Martinez, 75th Ranger Regiment." Her hands trembled as she forwarded the document to the Commemoration Committee's administrative officer. She included a brief note. "My grandmother, Elena Reyes, Navy Corpsman, requests permission to attend the Mogadishu commemoration ceremony. Documentation of service attached." The response came within an hour. It was from a captain she'd never heard of. "Lieutenant Torres, please have your grandmother contact me directly at this number. We need to verify some details. Captain R. Sanderson, Nav Spec Warcom Historical Division." Maya called her grandmother immediately. "Abuela, they want to talk to you." "I know. Captain Sanderson already called me. We spoke for 2 hours. And?" Elena's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. "He's making some calls. Said he needs to elevate this to his superiors. He sounded nervous, Mija, like he just opened a door he didn't know existed." The next morning, Lieutenant Commander Hutchins was in his office reviewing training schedules. When his phone rang, it was the Nav Specwarcom commander's office, a 2-star admiral. "Hutchins, this is Admiral Brennan's aide. The admiral wants to see you in his office at 1400 hours today. It's regarding the Mogadishu commemoration." Hutchins frowned. Is there a problem, sir? Just be there. Lieutenant Commander. The line went dead. At exactly 1400 hours, Hutchins stood outside the Admiral's office, his mind racing. He'd been part of the planning committee for the ceremony. Everything was locked in. Speakers, venue, press coverage. What could possibly require the Admiral's personal attention? The door opened. A stern-faced Master Chief nodded him inside. The Admiral will see you now. Admiral Brennan sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. Beside him stood Captain Sanderson, and another officer Hutchins didn't recognize. A thin, gray-haired man in civilian clothes with a Department of Defense badge. Lieutenant Commander Hutchins, the Admiral said, his voice flat. Sit down. Hutchins sat, his pulse quickening. Do you know a Lieutenant Junior Grade Maya Torres? Hutchins's stomach dropped. Yes, sir. She's an intel officer. She attended the pre-brief last week. And do you recall what she said during that briefing? Hutchins hesitated. She mentioned her grandmother, sir. Claimed she was in Mogadishu. I corrected her respectfully. The historical record shows. The historical record, the Admiral interrupted, is incomplete. Hutchins blinked. Sir? Captain Sanderson leaned forward. Lieutenant Commander, are you familiar with Task Force Rangers' medical support structure during Gothic Serpent? Generally, sir. Army medics, some Air Force PJs for medevac, and Navy corpsmen, Sanderson said quietly. Specifically, corpsmen cross-trained. With Ranger medical units under a pilot program that was quietly shut down after Mogadishu. It was deemed too controversial. Women in direct combat roles in 1993. So the records were buried, redacted, classified. Hutchins felt the blood drain from his face. The civilian spoke for the first time, his voice cold and precise. Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Elena Reyes was embedded with Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. She was on the ground for the entire engagement. She treated 14 casualties under direct enemy fire, including 2 SEAL operators from DevGru who were providing reconnaissance support. The room tilted. Hutchins gripped the armrests of his chair. One of those SEALs, the Admiral said, his eyes boring into Hutchins, is now a Command Master Chief at SEAL Team 3. I spoke with him this morning. He confirmed every detail. He also said, and I, quote, Doc Reyes saved my life. If anyone questions that, they can answer to me personally. Hutchins couldn't speak. So here's what's going to happen, Admiral Brennan continued. You are going to personally call Lieutenant Torres and apologize. Then you are going to call Elena Reyes and invite her to be a guest of honor at the ceremony. You will introduce her yourself, and you will do it with the respect and humility that woman has earned. Do you understand me? Yes, sir, Hutchins whispered. Good. Dismissed. That evening, Maya's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was local. She answered cautiously. Lieutenant Torres, this is Lieutenant Commander Hutchins. His voice was tight, strained. I owe you an apology. Maya said nothing, waiting. I was out of line during the briefing. I made assumptions, disrespectful assumptions, about you and about your grandmother. He paused, and she could hear him struggling with the words. I've since been educated on the actual facts of her service, and I need you to know that I was wrong, completely wrong. I appreciate that, sir, Maya said carefully. I'd like to personally invite your grandmother to be a guest of honor at the ceremony. I'll be introducing her myself, if she's willing. Maya felt a surge of vindication, but it was tempered by something else. Sadness. Her grandmother had waited 30 years for this recognition. 30 years of silence, of erasure. I'll ask her, sir. Thank you, Lieutenant. And again, I'm sorry, to both of you. The line went dead. The day of the ceremony arrived with typical San Diego weather. Brilliant sunshine and a cool ocean breeze. The venue was the Naval Amphibious Base, a large auditorium decorated with flags and photos from the Battle of Mogadishu. Rows of chairs filled with active duty personnel, veterans, families, and military brass. Maya arrived early with her grandmother. Elena wore a simple navy blue dress, her silver star pinned carefully to her chest alongside her combat action ribbon and purple heart. Her gray hair was styled neatly, and her hands, though weathered, were steady. "You okay, Abuela?" Maya asked as they walked toward the entrance. "I'm fine, mija. Just nervous. I haven't talked about this in so long." As they entered, heads began to turn. Some faces showed curiosity, others confusion. An elderly woman with a chest full of medals? Who was she? Lieutenant Commander Hutchins appeared almost immediately, his face pale but determined. He approached Elena and stood at attention. "Ma'am," he said, his voice formal. "Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Reyes. It's an honor to meet you. I'm Lieutenant Commander Brad Hutchins. I'll be introducing you today." He extended his hand. Elena studied him for a moment, then took his hand firmly. "Thank you, Commander." "No, ma'am. Thank you. For your service. And for your sacrifice. I'm sorry it's taken this long for the recognition you deserve." Elena nodded once, her expression unreadable. They were escorted to the front row, a place of honor typically reserved for flag officers and Medal of Honor recipients. Maya sat beside her grandmother, acutely aware of the stares and whispers around them. The ceremony began with the national anthem, followed by opening remarks from Admiral Brennan. He spoke about the legacy of Mogadishu, about courage under fire, about the bonds forged in combat. Then he paused, his expression growing serious. "Today, we honor not just the official history, but the complete history, the stories that were too uncomfortable, too inconvenient, too far ahead of their time to be told. We honor those who served in the shadows, not by choice, but because we, as an institution, weren't ready to see them." The room grew still. Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Elena Reyes was attached to Task Force Ranger during CIU, Operation Gothic Serpent. She was on the ground in Mogadishu on October 3rd and 4th, 1993. She treated casualties under direct enemy fire for 14 consecutive hours. She saved the lives of 14 men, including 2 naval special warfare operators. Gasps rippled through the audience. Heads turned toward Elena. Her service was classified, her story was buried. Not because she failed, but because we, as a military, as a nation, were not ready to accept that a woman could do what she did. That ends today. Admiral Brennan gestured toward Elena. "Ma'am, would you please stand?" Elena rose slowly, her chin high, her shoulders back. The room erupted in applause. It started with the Admiral, then the front row, then spread like wildfire through the auditorium. Officers stood, enlisted sailors stood. Veterans in the back rows, some in wheelchairs, some with canes, rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous, sustained, reverent. Maya felt tears streaming down her face. She looked at her grandmother, saw the slight tremble in her jaw, the way her hands gripped each other tightly. This moment, this recognition, was 3 decades overdue. As the applause finally subsided, Lieutenant Commander Hutchins took the podium. His hands gripped the edges tightly. "I'm going to be honest with you all," he began, his voice unsteady. "Last week, Lieutenant Torres told me her grandmother served in Mogadishu, and I laughed. I dismissed her. I assumed she was confused or exaggerating. I was wrong." He looked directly at Elena. "Doc Reyes, I'm sorry. You deserved better then, and you deserved better from me last week." He took a breath. "I've spent the last few days reading your after-action reports, the ones that were finally declassified. I've spoken to men who served with you, and I want to share some of what I learned." Hutchins pulled out a folder. Sergeant 1st Class James Chen, 75th Ranger Regiment, wrote, "Doc Reyes ran through a hail of AK fire to reach me after I took shrapnel to the leg. She dragged me behind cover, held pressure on my femoral artery with her bare hands for 40 minutes while calling in evac instructions on the radio. I was fading. She kept me awake by talking about her daughter's quinceañera. I'm alive because of her. Hutchins flipped a page. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Williams, SEAL Team 6, wrote, I took 2 rounds to the chest. Plates caught them, but the impact collapsed my lung. Doc Reyes performed a needle decompression in the middle of a firefight. Her hands didn't shake once. She's the best operator I ever worked with. Gender is irrelevant when someone's that good. The room was silent now, every eye on Hutchins. There are 14 stories like this. 14 men who went home to their families because of Doc Reyes. And for 30 years, almost no one knew. His voice cracked slightly. That's on us. That's on the institution that decided her story was inconvenient. He stepped back from the podium and faced Elena directly. Then, in front of the entire assembly, Lieutenant Commander Brad Hutchins rendered the sharpest, most respectful salute of his career. Thank you for your service, Doc. And thank you for your sacrifice. Elena returned the salute, her eyes glistening but her composure intact. The applause erupted again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just polite military courtesy. It was raw, emotional, a release of something that had been building for decades. Veterans were wiping their eyes. Young sailors who'd never heard of Elena Reyes were on their feet, clapping until their hands hurt. Admiral Brennan returned to the podium and raised his hand for quiet. We have a few more guests joining us today. Doc Reyes didn't come alone. The back doors of the auditorium opened. A man in his 60s entered first, walking with a slight limp. He wore a leather vest covered in patches, 75th Ranger Regiment, Task Force Ranger, a black and white POWBU MIA emblem. His weathered face was stern, his eyes scanning the room until they locked on Elena. Then his expression softened completely. Behind him came 3 more men. One was broad-shouldered and silver-haired, wearing a SEAL Trident pin on his suit jacket. Another was thin and wiry, with a neatly trimmed beard and a Navy veteran's cap. The last was younger, maybe 50, with a pronounced scar running down the left side of his face. They walked down the center aisle in silence, the crowd parting. Instinctively, Maya watched, her heart pounding. She recognized them from old photos her grandmother kept hidden, faces that had been young and terrified in 1993, now aged and dignified. The first man, the ranger with the limp, stopped directly in front of Elena. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. Doc. Jimmy, Elena whispered. Sergeant First Class James Chen, retired, opened his arms, and Elena stepped into the embrace. The auditorium was dead silent. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't ceremony. This was something deeper, more sacred. I told you I'd find you again, Chen said quietly, though the microphones picked it up. Took me 3 decades and some help from Captain Sanderson's office, but I found you. He stepped back, his eyes wet. You told me you'd get me home to see my daughter grow up. You kept that promise. She's a doctor now. Because of you. The SEAL stepped forward next. He was imposing, even in his 60s, with the kind of presence that made junior officers instinctively straighten their postures. Command Master Chief Marcus Williams retired, he said formally to the room. Then he looked at Elena, and his voice dropped. You put a needle in my chest while mortars were landing 20 feet away. You didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. You looked me in the eye and said, You're going to be fine, Chief. I've got you. He paused. And you did. For 30 years I've been trying to find you, to say thank you, so thank you, Doc. The thin man with the beard approached next, moving slowly, almost reverently. Hospital Corpsman First Class David Martinez, retired, he said. I was your backup that day, Doc. You taught me everything I know. You ran into hell, and I followed because I trusted you more than I trusted myself. His voice broke. You saved my life twice. Once from shrapnel and once when I was about to run into an ambush. You grabbed my collar and yanked me back. He smiled through tears. You were tougher than any SEAL I ever met. Finally, the younger man with the scar stepped forward. His movements were precise, controlled. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, 75th Ranger Regiment, retired. Maya's head snapped up. Torres. The same last name. The man looked at Maya, then at Elena, and smiled. "Doc, you probably don't remember me. I was a private, scared out of my mind. You patched up. My face after an RPG blast." He gestured to the scar. "You held my hand while you worked and told me I was going to be okay, that I was brave." He paused. "I named my daughter after you, Lieutenant Maya Elena Torres." Maya's breath caught. She stared at the man, at her father. He'd never told her the full story. Never explained why her middle name was Elena. Never said where the scar came from beyond combat injury. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. "Miguel. Little Miguel. Not so little anymore, Doc." He stepped forward and embraced her tightly. "You gave me my life, so I gave my daughter your daughter. Name. Seemed only fair." The room was no longer silent. People were crying openly now, hardened SEALs, veteran Rangers, young sailors who'd never seen combat. This was the raw, unfiltered truth of war. Not the glory, not the medals, but the bonds forged in blood and terror. Admiral Brennan cleared his throat roughly. These men represent 14 saved lives, 14 families that remained whole because of one Navy corpsman's courage. And for 30 years, her story was classified, buried, erased. His voice hardened. That changes today. Effective immediately, Hospital Corpsman, 2nd Class. Elena Reyes's complete service record will be declassified and made public. Her contributions to Operation Gothic Serpent will be included in all official histories. And, he paused for effect, I am recommending her for the Navy Cross. The auditorium exploded. The Navy Cross was the second highest military decoration for valor, just below the Medal of Honor. It was rarely awarded and almost never retroactively. Elena swayed slightly. Maya was at her side instantly, steadying her. "Abuela, I'm okay, mija," Elena whispered. "Just overwhelmed." Lieutenant Commander Hutchins stood off to the side, watching the scene unfold. His face was a mixture of awe and shame. He'd dismissed this woman as a confused grandmother telling tall tales. He'd laughed at her granddaughter. And now he was watching living legends embrace the woman they called Doc, with a reverence he'd never seen before. Captain Sanderson appeared beside him. "Humbling, isn't it?" Hutchins nodded, unable to speak. "That's the thing about history, Commander," Sanderson said quietly. "We like to think it's complete, clean, documented. But the truth is messy, and sometimes the most important stories are the ones we're too uncomfortable to tell." He glanced at Hutchins. "You're young, you'll make more mistakes. But you learned something valuable today. Don't assume you know the whole story just because you read the official report." "Yes, sir," Hutchins managed. After the formal ceremony concluded, the reception hall filled with people wanting to meet Elena, to shake her hand, to hear her story firsthand. She was gracious, humble, deflecting praise and instead talking about her boys, the men she'd treated. Maya stood beside her grandmother, watching with fierce pride. Her father, Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, appeared at her side. "You never told me," Maya said quietly. "I couldn't," he replied. "It was classified. I wasn't allowed to talk about Doc Reyes, about what really happened. All I could do was name you after her and hope that one day you'd understand." He looked at his daughter. "You have her courage, Maya, her determination. That's why I knew you'd make it in the Navy, even when everyone said a woman couldn't cut it in the intelligence community." "She's why I joined," Maya admitted. "Growing up, hearing the little bits you'd let slip, the way you talked about Doc with so much respect. I wanted to be like that, someone worth respecting." Michael put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "You already are, mija. You already are." As the reception continued, a commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention. The crowd parted, and a group of men entered. Some in their 60s and 70s, others younger, all wearing variations of military attire. Rangers, SEALs, Delta operators, Air Force PJs. They came in quietly, respectfully, but their presence was magnetic. Leading them was a man in a wheelchair, his legs missing below the knees. His chest was covered in medals, including a Medal of Honor. He was being pushed by a younger SEAL, but he raised his hand, signaling to stop. "That's General Patrick Morrison," someone whispered near Maya. "He was a captain in Delta during Mogadishu, lost his legs in the second Black Hawk crash." The general wheeled himself forward slowly, the crowd parting in absolute silence. He stopped in front of Elena, his weathered face etched with emotion. "Doc Reyes," he said simply. Elena's hand trembled as she covered her mouth. "Patrick? Oh my God, Patrick. You told me I'd dance at my daughter's wedding," the general said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "You said it while you were tourniqueting what was left of my legs. You said, 'Captain, you're going to dance at your daughter's wedding even if I have to carry you there myself.'" He smiled through the tears. "She got married 6 months ago. I danced with her, prosthetics and all." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a photo, a beautiful young woman in a white dress, dancing with her father. "I brought you a copy. Because you were right. And because every step I've taken since that day has been because of you." Elena took the photo with shaking hands, staring at it. "She's beautiful, Patrick. She's alive because her father survived. And he survived because you wouldn't let him quit." Morrison's voice grew stronger. "Doc, when they pulled me out of that wreckage, I was in shock, losing blood fast. I wanted to give up. You slapped me across the face hard and said, 'Not today, Captain, not on my watch.' That slap saved my life more than the tourniquets did." Laughter rippled through the room, breaking the tension. Morrison looked around at the assembled crowd. "I've spent 30 years in the military. I've commanded Rangers, worked with every special operations unit in our arsenal, advised presidents. And I can tell you without hesitation that Hospital Corpsman Second Class Elena Reyes is the bravest, most skilled warrior I have ever served with. Gender doesn't matter. Rank doesn't matter. All that matters is that when hell came to earth, she ran toward it, and she brought 14 of us home." He saluted her from his wheelchair, a crisp, perfect salute that held 3 decades of gratitude. Elena returned it, tears streaming freely now. One by one, the men Morrison had brought, with him, stepped forward. Each had a story. Each had a scar, literal or metaphorical, that Elena had helped heal. A former Delta operator named Jackson showed her a photo of his 3 children. "You kept me conscious after a head wound. Talked to me about baseball for 2 hours straight while we waited for extraction. I hated baseball, but I stayed awake because you wouldn't shut up about the Yankees." A former Air Force PJ named Rodriguez embraced her tightly. "You treated my shattered shoulder while I was screaming. You held my hand and sang. I don't even remember what song, but I remember feeling safe. In the middle of a war zone, you made me feel safe." A former Navy SEAL named Thompson knelt in front of her. "I took an AK round through the gut. You opened me up right there on the street, stopped the bleeding with your bare hands, and packed the wound with field dressings. The surgeon at the field hospital said if you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have made it to him. You performed battlefield surgery with no training, no equipment, just instinct and courage." The stories kept coming, each one more powerful than the last. These weren't just saved lives, they were saved futures. Marriages, children, grandchildren, careers, legacies. 14 men who went on to live full, rich lives because one woman refused to let them die. Lieutenant Commander Hutchins stood in the back, watching it all. He felt small, insignificant. He'd spent his career chasing the glory of the SEAL Trident, thinking that was what made a warrior. But watching Elena, this elderly woman in a simple dress, surrounded by giants who looked at her like she'd hung the moon, he realized he'd been chasing the wrong thing. Being a warrior wasn't about the uniform or the badge or the missions you could brag about. It was about the people you saved, the lives you changed, the moments when you put someone else's survival above your own. Captain Sanderson appeared at his elbow again. "Changed your perspective, Commander?" "Yes, sir," Hutchins said quietly. "Completely. Good. Because tomorrow, you're going to stand in front of your SEAL team and tell them this story. You're going to tell them about Doc Reyes, and you're going to explain to them why humility matters, why assumptions are dangerous, and why the most lethal operators aren't always the ones with the most confirmed kills." Sanderson's voice was firm. "You're going to make sure this story lives on, so that 30 years from now, no young officer makes the same mistake you did." "Yes, sir, I will." Later that evening, as the reception wound down, Maya found her grandmother sitting alone on a bench outside the venue, staring up at the stars. The sounds of the party filtered out through the doors, laughter, music, celebration. Maya sat down beside her. "How are you feeling, Abuela?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. "Relieved," she finally said. "For 30 years I thought I'd imagined it, that maybe my memories were exaggerated, that maybe I wasn't as brave or as capable as I remembered. They made me feel like I dreamed the whole thing. But you didn't." "No, I didn't." Elena looked at her granddaughter. "They tried to erase me, mija, not because I failed, but because I succeeded. Because I proved that women could do what they said we couldn't, and that scared them." "It doesn't scare them anymore," Maya said. "The Navy has female SEALs now, female Rangers, female Marines in combat roles. You helped make that possible." "Maybe," Elena said. "Or maybe it would have happened anyway. But at least, now the next young woman who says her grandmother was in combat won't be laughed at. At least now, someone will believe her." They sat in comfortable silence watching the stars. "Your father told you?" Elena asked. "About you saving him?" "Yes. Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because it wasn't my story to tell. It was his, and it was classified for so long that I got used to not talking about it." Elena smiled sadly. "But also because I didn't want you to join the military just to live up to some legend. I wanted you to join because it was your choice, your calling." "It was," Maya said, firmly. "You inspired me, Abuela. But I made my own choice." Elena took her granddaughter's hand. "And I'm proud of you. So proud. You stood up for me when no one else would. You made them listen. That took courage. I learned from the best." Inside, the party was still going strong. But out here, under the stars, 2 warriors, one retired, one just beginning, sat in the quiet understanding that only those who've faced fire truly share. Tomorrow, Elena's story would be in every military publication. There would be interviews, documentaries, official recognitions. The Navy Cross ceremony would come in a few months, attended by dignitaries and press. But tonight, it was just a grandmother and granddaughter sitting together, finally free of the burden of a secret that should never have been kept. 6 months later, the Navy Cross ceremony took place on the deck of the USS Midway Museum in San Diego. The aircraft carrier, now a floating monument to naval aviation history, provided a fitting backdrop for honoring a piece of hidden history finally brought to light. Elena stood on the flight deck in her dress blues, the uniform she hadn't worn in 3 decades, tailored to fit her older frame but still bearing her original ribbons and badges. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly behind her, gulls circling overhead, the sun warm on her face. Before her stood the Secretary of the Navy, flanked by Admiral Brennan and a formation of honor guards. Behind them, hundreds of sailors. Marines and civilians filled the deck. News cameras captured every moment. This wasn't just a ceremony, it was a correction of history. Maya stood in formation with other junior officers, her chest swelling with pride so intense it hurt. Her father stood nearby in the family section, wearing his dress uniform, his scar visible and somehow more dignified now that people knew its origin. All 14 men Elena had saved were present. Some walked, some used canes, one was in a wheelchair, but all 14 were there, standing at attention in whatever capacity they could manage. Their combined presence was a living testament, 144 years of additional life, 37 marriages, 52 children, 18 grandchildren, all because of one woman's courage. The Secretary of the Navy stepped forward, holding a wooden case containing the Navy Cross. His voice carried across the flight deck through the speakers. Today, we correct an injustice, not through malice but through institutional blindness. In 1993, Hospital Corpsman Second Class Elena Reyes performed acts of extraordinary heroism during Operation Gothic Serpent in Mogadishu, Somalia. Her actions directly saved 14 lives under the most extreme combat conditions imaginable. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Her story was classified. Her name was redacted from reports. Her service was acknowledged privately but never publicly. Why? Because in 1993, we as a nation, as a military, were not ready to accept that a woman could perform at this level in direct ground combat. We were not ready to challenge our own assumptions about courage, capability, and who could be a warrior. His voice grew harder, more impassioned. That failure is on us, on the institution, on the leaders who chose comfort over truth. Hospital Corpsman Reyes earned this recognition 30 years ago. That we are only giving it to her now is not her failure. It is ours. He opened the case, revealing the Navy Cross, a bronze cross with an eagle and anchor, suspended from a blue and white ribbon. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Elena Maria Reyes, for extraordinary heroism in action against enemy forces on October 3rd and 4th, 1993, while serving with Task Force Ranger during Operation Gothic Serpent in Mogadishu, Somalia. He began reading the full citation, his voice strong and clear. Every detail of those 14 hours was laid bare. The chaos, the violence, the impossible decisions. The moments when Elena chose to run toward danger instead of away from it. Demonstrating complete disregard for her own safety, Petty Officer Reyes repeatedly exposed herself to intense small arms and rocket-propelled grenade fire to reach and treat wounded personnel. On multiple occasions, she physically shielded casualties with her own body while administering life-saving medical care. Her actions directly prevented the loss of 14 lives and demonstrated the highest standards of courage, medical skill, and devotion to duty. As the citation concluded, the secretary pinned the Navy Cross to Elena's uniform. Then he stepped back and rendered a sharp salute. The flight deck erupted in applause, but it was quickly overwhelmed by something else. A sound that started low and built like thunder, the sound of hundreds of hands slapping against thighs in the traditional Navy Bravo Zulu for exceptional performance. The sharp rhythmic clapping echoed across the water. Elena stood at attention, tears streaming down her face, her jaw trembling with suppressed emotion. This was the recognition she'd never sought but had always deserved. When the applause finally subsided, Admiral Brennan stepped forward. Normally, this is where the ceremony would end, but we have one more presentation. He gestured toward the formation of the 14 saved men. Gentlemen, General Morrison wheeled himself forward, carrying a rectangular package wrapped in fabric. The other 13 men formed up behind him, a formation of gratitude spanning 4 branches of service. Morrison spoke, his voice carrying across the deck. Doc, we wanted to give you something that represents what you mean to all of us. Unwrapped the package, revealing a hand-carved wooden plaque. It was exquisite, detailed relief carvings depicting scenes from Mogadishu. At the center was the image of a corpsman treating a wounded soldier under fire, her face determined, her hand steady. Around the edges were carved 14 names, the names of the men she'd saved. At the top, in bold letters, Doc Reyes, Angel of Mogadishu. At the bottom, 14 saved, countless inspired, never forgotten. Morrison's voice broke slightly. We had this made by a veteran woodworker who lost his legs in Afghanistan. Each of us contributed to the design. Each name you see here represents not just a saved life, but a family, a future, a legacy. You gave us all of that. He looked up at her. We also wanted you to know that we've established the Elena Reyes Foundation. It provides scholarships for women pursuing careers as military medics and corpsmen. The first class of 10 scholarship recipients is here today. From the crowd emerged 10 young women in Navy dress uniforms, all hospital corpsman students. They formed a line and saluted Elena in unison. Elena's composure finally shattered. She brought her hands to her face, shoulders shaking with sobs, not of sadness but of overwhelming emotion. 30 years of silence, of erasure, of wondering if she'd mattered at all, answered in this single, perfect moment. Maya broke formation protocol and rushed to her grandmother's side, wrapping her arms around her. No. One stopped her. This moment transcended regulations. You did it, Abuela, Maya whispered. You changed everything. That evening, after the ceremony, after the press interviews, after the handshakes and photos, Elena and Maya returned to Elena's small house. They sat on the back porch with coffee, the sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. What will you do now? Maya asked. You're going to be famous. Every news outlet wants to interview you. There's talk of a book, maybe even a documentary. Elena was quiet, considering. I'll do some of it. For the young women. Coming up, so they know they have a place in this fight, so they know their stories matter. She sipped her coffee. But mostly, I just want to be a grandmother. I've spent enough time in the past. I want to enjoy the present. Maya smiled. Fair enough. What about you, Mija? This attention, some of it will fall on you too. The granddaughter who fought to tell the truth. I can handle it, Maya said confidently. Besides, I learned from the best. When things get tough, I'll just ask myself, what would Abuela do? And the answer is usually, keep moving forward. Elena laughed. A real, genuine laugh. That's all you can ever do in this life. Keep moving forward. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun disappear below the horizon. The next morning, Lieutenant Commander Hutchins stood before his SEAL team in the briefing room at Coronado. The room was packed with operators, hard men who'd seen combat, who prided themselves on being the best of the best. Today's brief isn't about tactics or equipment, Hutchins began. It's about humility. It's about the danger of assumptions. And it's about a woman who taught me one of the most important lessons of my career. He proceeded to tell them Elena's story, every detail, every moment of heroism, and then he told them about his own failure, how he'd dismissed her, mocked her granddaughter, assumed he knew better. The room was silent when he finished. I'm telling you this because I don't want any of you to make the same mistake I did. Don't assume you know someone's story just because they don't look like what you expect a hero to look like. Don't dismiss someone because they don't fit your mental image of a warrior. He pulled up a photo of Elena on the screen, the one from the ceremony, her Navy cross gleaming on her chest. This woman is tougher than any of us. She ran into fire with no weapon, no armor, no backup, just her medical kit and her courage. She saved 14 lives in one engagement. How many of us can say that? He paused. She's a better operator than I'll ever be, and I almost missed learning that lesson because I was too arrogant to listen. One of the senior chiefs in the back raised his hand. Sir, permission to speak? Go ahead, Chief. I was at that ceremony. I watched those 14 guys, Rangers, Delta, SEALs, PJs, all look at her like she walked on water. That's the kind of respect you can't fake. That's earned. He nodded. Thanks for sharing this, sir. We needed to hear it. Hutchins nodded. We all did. Epilogue. 2 years later, the Naval Special Warfare Command unveiled a new training facility at Coronado. On the wall of the main building hung a massive portrait. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Elena Reyes in her dress blues, her Navy Cross prominently displayed. Beneath the portrait, a bronze plaque read, Courage has no gender. Valor knows no boundaries. Doc Reyes proved that when it matters most, the only thing that counts is the strength of your heart and the depth of your commitment to those beside you. Every SEAL candidate, every SWCC operator, Every Navy corpsman training at Coronado passed that portrait. Most stopped to read the story. Some saluted. All remembered. Elena Reyes's story was no longer classified, no longer hidden, no longer dismissed. It was part of the permanent record, a testament to courage that refused to be erased. And in a small house in San Diego, an elderly woman tended her garden, played with her great-grandchildren, and lived the quiet life she'd always wanted. The medals were in a drawer. The plaque hung in her garage. The fame had faded into comfortable obscurity. But every year on October 3rd, 14 families, now spanning 4 generations, gathered to remember. They called it Doc's Day. They told stories, shared photos, and made sure their children and grandchildren knew the name Elena Reyes. Because heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear navy blues and carry medical kits. Sometimes they're grandmothers who keep their stories quiet because the world wasn't ready to hear them. Until one day, the world finally was.